Hello and welcome to the Daily Politics. There won't be any new grammar schools, but ministers are giving existing grammars and faith schools permission to expand. The Brexit campaign group Leave.eu is fined £70,000 for breaking spending rules during the referendum. Founder Aaron Banks joins us live. The Conservatives are given a guide on how to do Instagram.
Instagram is, of course, all about the pictures, which they suggest should be both personal, fun and full of real people. And they say the tone should be playful.
And speaking of playful, we'll be talking about the politics of Eurovision after one MP suggests we should leave the contest after Brexit. All that in the next hour, and with us for the duration, two commentators just as comfortable, talking about Eurovision as the European Economic Area. Thank goodness for that. I know which one I'd rather be discussing anyway. It's Chloe Wesley from the Taxpayers Alliance and Jim Waterson from The Guardian. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
First of all today, let's talk about a story that's appeared in a number of the papers after Education Secretary Damien Hinds confirmed that the government is offering £50 million to existing grammar schools to provide thousands of new places. The Mail hails a new dawn for our grammars, while the Mirror takes the opposing view and calls it a £50 million grammar school scandal. You may remember that Theresa May had already dropped plans for a new wave of grammar schools after failing to win an overall majority at the general election. Let's have a listen to Damien Hinds.
We always need to look at the demographic need we have for school places. Actually, we've created 800,000 school places since 2010. We want to push that forward to make sure that we carry on growing good school places. 1.9 million more children now in good or outstanding schools than there were in 2010. But we need to keep revisiting that.
Damien Hinds there. Well, Jim, big announcement, but has anything actually changed? Is there anything new?
Well, there's an extra pot of funding for expansion, providing they meet certain criteria. But the thing that intrigues me with this announcement is the extent to which it's played so well on the front page of the Daily Mail, and it's a policy that works incredibly well only in a small number of areas which currently have grammar schools, but are often ones that waver between the Conservatives and were quite heavily pro-Brexit during the EU referendum. Basically, it's a very good policy for playing to the Tories' core audiences in Lincolnshire, Kent and South Manchester.
Right. I mean, politically, what do you think it does and says to a either Tory supporting audience or those who oppose?
Well, I think it's very popular with a lot of people because it's about giving opportunities to bright kids that might not be able to afford private school education. And I think it's providing opportunities for everyone in society is very important. So I think this grammar school plan will be popular with people.
Right, but it is selective over education over state education more broadly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Labour is strongly against that, and we saw there the Mirror front page. It's one of those issues where it divides people down the middle, and the moment that you've chosen your side, you stick with it forever. And again, the thing that I come back to is they almost don't need to put much into practice. They don't actually need to necessarily implement a lot of this. There's only 50 million available. That's not an awful lot of money.
And it's money that's already been announced?
I'm not entirely sure on that bit, but they certainly, it's not the biggest sum of money in the terms of the
It certainly isn't in terms of the
budget.
budget, and I think it is money that has already been announced. But as you say, it's all about signalling something politically. If we talk about the fact that the government's not going to remove the charitable status tax breaks from private schools which failed to reach benchmarks on joining up with state schools, what message does that send?
Well, I think it's important to invest in state education as well and make sure that's very good for people that don't have the opportunities to go to private or grammar schools. But I would think it was a mistake for Theresa May to go back on her pledge with grammar schools. And it's interesting, a lot of the politicians most against these plans actually benefited from going to grammar schools themselves, like John McDonnell and Diane Abbott. And so I think it's one role for politicians. They can benefit from it. But if the general population want this opportunity, then they want to take it away.
But so much of the impact of grammar schools comes down to the people who are going into them, and disproportionately it's well-off middle-class people who are able to get into these schools.
Let's go more across the country in areas where this kind of education is needed.
And then you'd have the same impact across the country where you'd have a certain strata of society going into the grammar system and the rest being left in other schools.
Well, you need to make sure that it's fair and that every kid has an opportunity to get a good education like this.
But would every kid get that opportunity?
Well, at the moment, you can only get that opportunity if you live in one of these areas, and there's a lot of issues with house prices going up in these areas because instead of going to private school, a lot of middle-class families are moving to areas where there are grammar schools, and that puts up the house prices. So there are knock-on effects of only limiting it to the areas that they currently exist in.
All right, let's leave it there. And talking of Leave, Leave.eu was, you might remember, one of the Brexit supporting campaign groups during the EU referendum. And today it's been fined £70,000 for breaches of election law. Our correspondent, Eleanor Garnier, can tell us more. Eleanor, what was it for?
Well, you'll remember that Leave.eu wasn't the official Brexit campaign group, but it was still allowed to spend £700,000 in the referendum campaign in 2016. It's the group that's associated with Nigel Farage, the former UKIP leader, and Aaron Banks, so neither of them are singled out as having done anything wrong. What the Electoral Commission has found is that it overspent its limit by at least 10%. That's why it's been fined £70,000. But it also found it gave incomplete and inaccurate information about 3 loans, that it failed to provide invoices and receipts for payments totalling £80,000. And it also, when it came to services from a US campaign group called Goddard Gunster, those were not included in its spending return. So the chief exec of Leave.eu has been referred to the police, with the Electoral Commission saying it had reasonable grounds to believe she knowingly or recklessly filed incorrect information on the campaign's spending. We should note, Joe, as well, that the Commission found no evidence that the tech firm Cambridge Analytica had made donations or provided paid-for services, and that its work was limited to sort of a scoping work only. And remember, Cambridge Analytica has just announced it's closing down.
Right, I mean, Eleanor, Leave.eu isn't the only organisation or group to be fined, is it?
That's right. This is a record equalling fine. It's a big fine, £70,000. But as you say, it's not the only group to have been fined. UKIP was also fined for the financial campaign, or the finances around its campaign in the referendum. So too the Liberal Democrats, of course, a pro-EU party. Another pro-EU group called European Movement was also fined. And there is a separate investigation going on into the official group, Vote Leave. That investigation is still going on.
Eleanor Garnier, thank you very much. Well, in a moment, we hope to be speaking to the co-founder of Leave.eu. As I said, he's Aaron Banks. But before we go to him, to you two, first of all, what do you make of this fine, record fine?
Oh, well, it's the cost of doing business. It's 70 grand from a campaign that spent millions. It's essentially over the paperwork that was filed and the timing of the payments. And the interesting thing is whether or not a criminal charge comes of this. What we are seeing is Electoral Commission having some teeth. It's been previously very reluctant to investigate, let alone fine people substantially, and it's coming under pressure to do that. But I think the real one that's going to be very interesting, and I'd be interested to hear your views on it, having worked on the campaign, is what happens to Vote Leave and their separate investigation, which is yet to conclude.
Right, we'll come to you about that in just a moment, because Aaron Banks is now there in Belfast for us. Aaron Banks, it's the price of doing business. What do you say?
Well, I completely disagree. You know, we've said we're not happy with what the Electoral Commission have said today, and we will be challenging it in court.
Why aren't you happy? I mean, they seem to have fairly clear reasons for fining you that amount. You broke the rules.
Well, that's not, in our opinion, that's not true. It's a disputed amount of 70,000 that led to a £7 grand overspend on the campaign. That was an internal management charge, which our lawyers have told us wasn't reportable. So we've absolutely made clear that we responded to them with a... I mean, the interesting thing about it is that they issued their draft report after 400 days, asked for our feedback, which we gave, 20 pages of response, an independent accountant's report, which they took 3 days to consider. Now, in the opinion of our lawyers, there's no way they could have done that. So effectively what they've done is they started off their investigation with a remit of investigating Cambridge Analytica and dark Russian money. They found no evidence of any of those things, and they've kind of fined us on a technical accounting issue which is heavily in dispute.
Right, but you do believe that spending rules should be applied, and
Absolutely.
you support and believe in the law.
Absolutely.
Right.
But we disagree with the facts that they put forward. We say that this is not reportable expenditure. And as I say, we sent a 20-page report back along with an independent accountant's opinion of various levels of spend, and they've chosen to ignore that completely and just take the word draft off their report.
Right.
So we'll see them in court, and we'll let a judge decide who's right and who's wrong.
Right. You've said that you think it's politically motivated. Why?
Well, of course it is. I mean, the chairman of the Electoral Commission actually said in public comments that the Brexit campaign was a collection of Eurosceptic nonsense. That's from the man himself. There's been other comments from other Commission members. One said that Blair was right, we need a second referendum. Another one said that the young should ignore the result of the referendum. I mean, it's a politically motivated body.
Was it politically motivated when they fined the Liberal Democrats, the pro-EU party? They were fined £18,000 for breaking spending rules.
Well, I don't know what the Liberal Democrats did or didn't do. I know what we did, which is we filed our report correctly. We responded to their allegations with a 20-page report and an independent accountant's opinion, by the way, and they chose in 3 days just to ignore that and go ahead with their fine.
But I don't quite see, I mean, if you're saying they're politically motivated, it's clear that they have fined other organisations that, in your view... Well, hang on, let me just finish. So the Liberal Democrats have been fined. Yeah. So was a European Movement UK spending return, also incomplete and inaccurate, and also UKIP. So are you saying that they are a corrupt organisation?
Well, I'm saying that they're politically motivated in the same way the House of Lords is. I mean, these are people, if you look up, if you thought about this rationally, the body that oversees politics should be apolitical. The board of
they say they are apolitical.
Well, yes, but the board of the Electoral Commission is made up of former MPs, ex-Liberal MPs, ex-SNP, former Labour leader councils. It's anything but. And we know that it's a political, it acts in a political way.
Or it's just sour grapes on your part because you actually broke the spending rules, you overspent and you've been fined accordingly.
Well, I've just gave you our explanation. It was to do with a internal management charge, which we do not believe is reportable.
Right, but I mean, how do you explain that other parties, pro-EU parties, have also been fined?
Well, that's not for me to explain, is it? I'm telling you what I think is a justification for today's opinion. Right. And I think it follows on, a sustained campaign against Brexit.
Chloe, what do you say, listening to Aaron Banks? Do you think that the Electoral Commission is politically motivated in the way he's just outlined?
No, I don't think so. I think they probably base their decision on evidence, and they have investigated Vote Leave twice and found there was no wrongdoing. There's another investigation pending now, so we'll see what happens. But I just think it's really rich, actually. Some Remain campaign is now preaching to Leavers about how there was some kind of unfair advantage. If you want to talk about an unfair advantage, let's talk about that £9 million leaflet, the OECD, the big banks, all of the political elite powering behind the Remain campaign. I mean, the idea that Leave had an unfair advantage is a bit nonsensical.
And what do you say to the Remain line that actually organisations like Aaron Banks basically cheated to get the result?
Well, I must admit, having dealt with Aaron a lot during the referendum and his campaign, I think that Leave.e sometimes was one of the most catastrophically chaotic campaigns I've ever dealt with at all. But what I'm interested and would like to ask Aaron is much more about whether he'll finally give a full declaration of where the money that he put in, the millions of pounds that he put into the campaign, came from.
Right, Aaron?
Yeah, it came from me. It came from Peter Hargreaves that donated £3.3 million to send 10 million letters out, and it came in from public donations, all of which we've disclosed. By the way, for Jim Waterstone, obviously The Guardian have purveyed fake news on this story right from the very beginning. But if we look at the genesis of where this investigation started, it started with Ben Bradshaw using parliamentary privilege to claim that we had used Cambridge Analytica and been involved in Russian dark money. Today's report from the Electoral Commission says it has no evidence of that and actually has fined us on a technical accounting query.
Right.
I think people like Jim are a bit sad and bitter about it because they lost the referendum. They clearly thought that we were, incompetent or, whatever other words he uses. But actually what we did was motivate millions of working class Labour people to go out and vote for Brexit.
But Jim, are you sad and bitter?
Absolutely not. I mean, I was covering the campaign as an independent journalist.
Oh, yeah, right.
Standing on the Nigel Farage flotilla alongside Aaron as he looked on the Palace of Westminster.
You're about as unbiased as Carol Cadwallader and the rest of the Guardian idiots.
Well, I'm delighted to have such a strong endorsement of my new publication from a man such as yourself, Aaron. But look, this is, I think the interesting thing as well is that this is still playing out 2 years on, and no matter what happens, I don't think there's any chance really now of this affecting or in any way impacting the outcome, which is going to be Britain leaving the EU.
I mean, Jim, wouldn't you agree that even if it was correct, we dispute it, that a £7,000 overspend on £12 million of campaign finance is a drop in the ocean? We dispute it and we say it's incorrect, but even if it was true, it would be a tiny amount of money.
And with that in mind, I do think the interesting thing is what happens to Vote Leave, who have allegedly overspent by a substantially more money, according to the investigation that is currently winding its way through the Electoral Commission.
I think, I've opinion of Vote Leave, which is probably not a great deal better than yours.
Right. I mean, Chloe, what do you want to say? You voted, you work for Vote Leave. Chloe, what do you say?
Well, as I said, it's an ongoing investigation. Vote Leave have been cleared twice. I think, I think there is a real, it smacks of desperation a little bit from people who don't want Brexit to happen. And, they've lost the argument on the single market and the customs union, kind of clutching at straws at any way to belittle the result. But you're right, Jim. There's no way that we're going to stop Brexit now. It's happening. I think, we should just get on with it and wait for the investigation.
Vote Leave gave more than £500,000 in the final days of the referendum campaign to a 23-year-old fashion student who was working often in the Vote Leave office. I mean, that is a somewhat unusual arrangement.
Well, it was cleared by the Electoral Commission, and there's new evidence that's come forward, and on this show we saw there was no smoking gun, as you found out. So we'll see what happens.
Aaron, I just wanted to ask you because
I was just going to say to Jim Waterstone, the Electoral Commission okayed a £9 million spend from the government, who was a non-participant in this, to send a leaflet to everyone in the country.
Right.
They rode roughshod over every rule.
Can I just ask, because Chloe mentioned, Brexit is going to happen. Yeah. Why do you think the DUP are the great defenders at the moment of Brexit?
Well, I think that they believe in the Brexit principles. I mean, people call it hard Brexit or otherwise, but our view is that leaving the European Union is leaving the customs union and leaving the single market, and I do think they will hold the government to account. Right,
you don't think they're more interested in protecting the union than they are pursuing the kind of Brexit that you'd like to see?
I think they're interested in many things, but clearly the government rely on them for their majority, and they're an important voice.
All right, Aaron Banks, thank you
very much. Pleasure.
It's been another week when Brexit has been the big story at Westminster. Here's Greg Dawson with a roundup of that and everything else that's been going on in just 60 seconds.
In perhaps his most significant foreign policy move to date, President Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal.
The Iran deal is defective at its core.
That was despite the best efforts of the Foreign Secretary to persuade the US to stay put.
Then I don't see why he's any less of a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Talking of Boris, back home there was more infighting on Brexit.
If the Brexit plan is that crazy, are you ready to resign?
With the cabinet split as to whether it should back a customs partnership or maximum facilitation. Meanwhile, in the Lords, the government suffered its 14th defeat on the EU withdrawal bill. In the Commons, some rather animated calls for tighter press regulation failed.
What? No, I will not give way.
Elsewhere, Debbie Abrahams was sacked from Labour's front bench over claims of bullying, which she denies. And get ready for a by-election in Lewisham next month after Heidi Alexander stepped down as an MP.
You heard Greg there talking about the divisions in Cabinet over two opposing plans for our customs arrangements after Brexit. And it's been reported today that Theresa May has split her Cabinet, as if they needed any help there, Cabinet ministers into two rival camps to work out their differences. Kevin Schofield is from the website Politics Home. Welcome to the programme, Kevin.
Hi.
Explain exactly what Theresa May's plan is.
Well, that's a very good question. At the moment, as your package just said there are two options that the Cabinet are considering. There's a customs partnership, which we believe is Theresa May's preferred option, and we have the other option, which is known as maximum facilitation, or MaxFac, which is the option which is preferred by your Brexiteers like Michael Gove, David Davis and Boris Johnson. Now, the two camps remain and leave within the Cabinet cannot come to an agreement on which one to plump for, so the Prime Minister has hit upon a bit of a wheeze where she split up her Brexit subcommittee, which is 11 ministers within the Cabinet. She split She's created two camps essentially to look at both of these options. There's three in each, three ministers in each camp to examine these options and then come back and say which one they think should be chosen. And then that has to go to the full cabinet to decide ultimately whether or not they're going to plump for, as I say, customs partnership or max FAC. But there's no timetable really been set on it. We've just been told by Number 10 that they're working towards October is the final deadline on when they have to make up their minds. So maybe it might be quite some time yet.
Is this a sort of punishment to those cabinet ministers by mixing them up with their foes on Brexit?
I think there's probably a bit of that. I think Liam Fox and Michael Gove are in with David Liddington on one side, and David Davis is in with Greg Clark and Karen Bradley in the maximum facilitation working group. So yeah, there is a bit of that. Or maybe she's trying to play them off against each other to a certain extent, but it's a real rum state of affairs, I would say. We're now less than a year before we finally leave Brexit. We're supposed to have a final deal by October, and the government still can't make up its mind on what type of customs arrangement it wants with the European Union after Brexit. It's all a bit of a mess.
Right. Well, Kevin Schofield, thank you for trying to clear up at least the plan. Chloe, love to be a fly on the wall, or maybe not. It sounds so much fun. What do you think of it?
Yeah, well, I think the reason why many Brexiteer ministers have rejected this new customs partnership is because it's difficult to see how it differs very much from being members of the customs union. And it's really important to note in this conversation about the customs union, actually, that the issue of the border with Northern Ireland will not be solved merely by remaining in the customs union. So any politician saying that we should stay in the customs union to, avoid conflict is not being straight with people.
Right. Is it going to work, though, this plan of Theresa May's in terms of finding a way through, or is it a little bit like something from the thick of it?
Well, it doesn't seem to have worked so far. I mean, eventually these things, as in most things in life, sort of a fudge is normally agreed and something will have to happen because it has to happen because we've got a hard deadline. We are going to be leaving the EU pretty soon. So I do think Kev's point there of just the sheer craziness of that time frame that we're now coming up against. Time is running out and they'll have to come up with something, and it's just who blinks first.
Right. I mean, in terms of that timetable, do you think, Chloe, that the conclusion on Theresa May's part's been sort of predetermined here?
How do you mean, that she'll have to leave when...
No, or that she's sort of set up these two working groups to sort of come to a conclusion that she would like them to reach?
Well, it's difficult to know what conclusion she would like to reach. She's got many civil servants around her that would quite like the customs partnership option, but she's in a difficult position because the kind of Brexiteer ministers don't agree with that. Personally, I think that the mass FAC option would be preferable, but you're right. It is a tight deadline.
From a media perspective, we tried our best, but we had to settle for this is quite a good line to say to your hard pro-Brexit ministers.
I mean, is that what this is about? It's sort of forcing, as Kevin said, the issue onto those two groups and then saying, well, you couldn't find a way through, so, I can't either.
I've done that in my own life. That's quite a good way of dealing with awkward situations, to say, well, I tried my best, but I really couldn't make it work. So I have no particular insight into what's going on in that room, but, I mean, just human nature suggests that's not a bad way of dealing with it.
Right, and just very briefly, because we're going to talk about the by-election in Lewisham, the EU, of course, doesn't like either option, so it doesn't really address the working party idea, how they're going to face them down.
And the EU have so far rejected any option that doesn't really mean that the UK would be have to remain in the customs union, so they've been very difficult as well. So it's not just ministers that have to agree, it's also the EU. But we absolutely must leave the customs union. It was a key pledge and a key benefit of leaving the EU is these trade deals with the rest of the world and lowering tariffs, and I really hope the government delivers on that pledge.
Right, Labour MP Heidi Alexander going off to work for Sadiq Khan, the mayor. Safe Labour seat, so the story is more about an internal Labour battle.
Yeah, who gets the nomination? We saw Harriet Harman's son, Joe Dromey, put his hat into the ring today, which I think if he got elected would mean he'd be the first ever person to be serving in the House of Commons alongside both of his parents, which would be an interesting
Making a little footnote in history there, I suppose, wouldn't it?
But no, the interesting thing is in terms of how it's being very, very tightly controlled by the central party, their candidate there. And so I have a feeling that the candidate might have been already decided by someone, but they just haven't let us know yet.
Oh, well, that's never happened before, of course, in either party. Now, do you prefer the puppy or the koala or the bunny filter? No idea what I'm talking about? Well, neither did many Conservative MPs until recently. They've been issued with guidelines on how best to take pictures for social media and Instagram in particular. We've been given a copy and Elizabeth Glinker has been taking a look.
Instagram is used by over 17 million people in the UK, and the majority of those users are under 34. It's a demographic that the Conservatives are struggling to reach. Their attempts on Instagram during the 2017 conference were heavily criticised. Since then, party chairman Brandon Lewis has arranged training sessions for MPs on setting up accounts. And this leaked presentation gives us some insight into the practical advice they've been given on using it to show they're a real person and attract those younger voters. The advice really does start with the basics. So first up, writing a bio. They say it should be concise and personal, like these. And the picture should show you, and ideally, you should be doing something active. Instagram is, of course, all about the pictures, which they suggest should be both personal, fun, and full of real people. And they say the tone should be playful. They highlight this Throwback Thursday post from Peter Bottomley. Hashtags, that's a subject a lot of people are talking about, are, they say, a good thing, as are stickers, emojis, and tags. That's the names of other people who are in your pictures. This post from the now Home Secretary Sajid Javid comes in for lots of praise. As the advice suggests, you can use filters on your pictures to make them look even better. Liz Truss has been rocking those filters to much acclaim. Oh, and it says you can help get messages across more clearly by adding your own text in boxes or writing it like this. Timing, they say, is everything. More people are using the app after 5 o'clock, and peak times are between 8 and 9 p.m. In the end, most of this advice is pretty solid, but what's significant is that the Conservatives, like other political parties, are realising being good at this is increasingly important.
Well, that was an incredibly useful guide. I've been taking notes. Thanks, Lizzie. We're joined now by Joey D'Urso, one of the BBC's political researchers, who got hold of the Conservative Party's guidelines for Instagram. Lucky you. So, Joey, what's in the document? Tell us.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's fair to say the Conservative social media strategy came under a fair bit of criticism last summer, and so earlier this year the party had a sort of training session for MPs showing them how to use Instagram. And we've got hold of the actual PowerPoint here. It's called "How Can an MP Benefit from Using Instagram?" And the first point is speak directly to a younger audience. Conservatives, of course, did far worse than Labour at the last election, and they view Instagram as a way that they can potentially reach younger voters. It also says that Instagram is a chance to show you are a real person who people can relate to or be inspired by.
I love that phrase, a real person. How are the parties using different social media, so Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to distinguish between these different platforms that have different audiences. Facebook, of course, you know, is massive, huge proportion of the UK population uses it, including lots of older people, and that's mainly been the focus so far of parties in advertising.
Political debate, and there was this one safe space of Instagram where you could just look at nice holiday pictures and things with filters on, and blow me, now politicians are trying to invade that as well.
Right, oh Jim, you're such a downer on politics involving social media. What do you think? Who are the stars of social media politicians?
Well, the left tend to do social media a bit better, but I think Jacob Rees-Mogg has a hilarious Instagram, and it works because it's authentic. So you shouldn't go on Instagram or one of these social media platforms unless it's authentic and you're being yourself. I mean, so those guidelines I would disagree with. Don't force it. Don't try to be something you're not. But I think the idea that if the Conservatives just get good on social media, young people will vote for them is completely wrong. I mean, you need good policies. Like, young people aren't going to go, oh, wow, they're so cool, I'm going to vote Conservative. No, you need policies, solve the housing crisis, let us keep more of our money, and have a skills-based global immigration system. That'd be my tips for winning over young voters.
Right, I hope they're listening. Isn't it a way, though, of reaching a different audience?
Oh, yeah, no, it makes sense. And the tone is also interesting. The Conservatives have, from an incredibly low base, we saw some of the absolutely terrible pictures that were used at the party conference from their Instagram, from a very low base, have improved. And the thing that intrigues me is the tone of their activists online, the individuals, not the party accounts, is sort of a no one likes us and we don't care, almost trying to run it as an insurgent campaign, going, we know the internet is dominated by the left, even though we're the party of government, we're going to sort of enjoy that outsider status online.
So an admission that they can't really beat them. I mean, those...
Or that, the one thing that they have in their favour is that it's the outsider status.
I mean, how effective, Joey, were both parties in last elections in terms of utilising media? We sort of broadly feel that Labour Party did better.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to kind of draw a direct line between a social media campaign and votes at the ballot box. But certainly, I mean, in 2015, the Conservatives did better than they expected. They surprised the polls. And one reason that people have made for that is that they campaigned very effectively on Facebook. They spent 10 times more than Labour did, targeting very specific groups of people in very specific areas. But in 2017, it was completely different. And Labour spent less money but got far more reach on social media. And that was largely because of what we call organic sharing in the jargon, which is people choosing to share with their own friends a particular Labour post rather than it being targeted by the party itself.
I mean, how much do you think it is an echo chamber? You mentioned it earlier, that people talking to themselves, particularly on Twitter. I mean, do you think that is...
I think that's broadly correct. It's really just for lots of people that are obsessed with topics to get together and talk. I think Twitter is a bit of an echo chamber, and I wouldn't waste any money advertising on there if I was a political campaign. But you made a good point about the sharing, the organic sharing, because it's not about how good your technology is, it's about what the content is. So if you've got a really good, inspiring video or picture, people are going to share it. You won't have to pay for it to get shared.
Right. One of the things you haven't said, any of you, is that actually the best way to get your message out is to appear on the Daily Politics.
It honestly is. There you are.
Nice.
Although the one thing just very quickly to bear in mind is so much has changed online since even the 2017 election that a lot of the lessons we're learning from that election won't even apply next time around because the algorithms change all the time.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for coming in, and thank you for bringing in the guidelines for us. Having a good credit score can boost your chances of getting a loan, a credit card or a mortgage. But if you rent your home, those rental payments are not recorded by the credit reference agencies. The founder of The Big Issue, the crossbench peer, John Bird, wants to change that, and he has a bill in the Lords today. Let's have a quick listen.
One of the sure signs of social exclusion is the fact that you can't go to certain shops. You can't buy in certain areas. You can't even go to Argos. The fact that you can get credit, as has been proved by work like Jesse Jackson in America, that when you move into a situation where you can get ordinary credit, they call it white man's credit, as soon as you can get credit like other people, it's almost like a nudge towards respectability. As soon as you can start saving a bit of money in a credit union, it's a kind of moving. It's a gradual psychological move.
And John Bird joins us now from the Houses of Parliament. John, we heard you there, but what's been the motivation for putting forward this bill in terms of what it's going to achieve?
Well, the reason we're doing it is because you've got 11 million people, many of them in social housing, who are paying their rent. Probably about 80% of those people are doing pretty good at paying their rent. They have a record, but they have a very low credit rating, and they pay through the nose for their credit. And we're saying, why should the poorest amongst us, or why should people who are stuck in rented accommodation, why should they pay more for their credit than if you had a mortgage? So it's a kind of levelling up of the thing. Also, the thing is that there is a decided amount of people who are having problems paying their rent, who have a poor credit rating, and at the moment they are just out there and nobody knows who they are, nobody's addressing, they're being left. And we need to address those people who are paying their rent, and we need to address those people who are having problems with their credit. And as the FCA said to me, what we've got to do is embrace those people and find a way out of having to go to payday loans, having to go to to sharks and doorstep lenders who are charging through the nose.
But there are schemes already in place, aren't there, that will actually help renters build up a credit history? It's not like nothing exists.
Well, you say that, but I was with some housing association people the other day, and they say every now and then somebody asks for records because somebody wants to borrow, and it's the status quo is here and there. It's not consistent, and most people who are paying their rent are not having that rent record being used as a way of reducing of increasing their credit rating.
Right. I mean, credit ratings tend to be affected, don't they, if you've had lots of different addresses, if you're moving around a lot. I mean, do you think there'll be a lot of renters who might not want to have that sort of data on file, which shows they've had numerous tenancies?
Yeah, but you see, that's the illusion, because the thing is that your rent record is only used if you want it used. And the point is, and this is a really interesting point, the only time you would ever have your record of brought to somebody is when you're going to somebody. Maybe you're going to Argos, and you're going to Argos and say, I want to buy this or I want to buy that. And then Argos will say, all right, then what's your rent record? And they'll look at it. So you're not going to go to Argos if you've got a poor credit rating. You're going to go to Bright House, and you're going to pay through the nose. But nobody is really doing anything about these people. Nobody is doing anything about reducing the cost of borrowing for the poorest amongst us. So they're paying through the nose.
Right. What about the government's response? I mean, have you got a lot of support for your bill?
We had a cross-party support. We had people bearing in mind that we have to tread very carefully, that we don't want any laws of unintended consequences taken. We don't want people excluded. But we had a general consensus. Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, Green Party support, so across the party. What the government is really saying is like what the government would nearly always say, which is that we don't want to interfere with the market. And what we're saying, that what the FCA has to do is to have to mandatorily say that anybody who is lending money and the person is paying rent, it has to be taken into account.
Okay.
Whether they then want to lend it is entirely up to them, because that's their commercial decision.
OK, John, stay with us. I mean, Chloe, what do you think of the idea? I mean, is it really a justification to say, on the government side, that we don't want to interfere into this particular market? I mean, it makes it very hard for all those millions of renters if they haven't got a reliable credit history.
Well, this sounds like quite a good idea to me, actually, quite a sensible idea. The important thing in designing this bill will be to make sure it doesn't put too much unnecessary regulations on landlords, or increase their burden of having to there have to be some safeguards in there. But it sounds like a good idea. I'm a renter, and this would help me. So.
Right. I mean, why should they pay more than people who have got mortgages in that sense? I mean, the government, apparently the Treasury, is looking at something called a rent recognition challenge to look for a sort of digital solution. Do you think they're not going to lend their support here to John?
This sounds like quite a challenge in terms of fitting with the government's sort of continued war on regulation and whether or not they can make that work. But this is not, by the sounds of it, interfering with a market per se. It's saying you have to take this into account. And, a lender wants to lend money at the end of the day. They want a return. They only make money when they are lending. Therefore, if they can lend to more people with good credit histories, I can't see why it wouldn't be in their favour.
Right. I mean, John, what do you think about this rent recognition challenge that the Treasury is looking into to find some sort of digital solution? Would you support that?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The Treasury have launched something called a rent recognition challenge.
Oh, yeah.
They're trying to find a sort of digital solution to the problem.
They're calling it the fintech solution. It's so interesting. When you talk to the people who won that competition, the £2 million competition, if you speak to them, they all say it's great us gathering the information, but unless you make it mandatory through the FCA, then you can't use it. So what's the status quo is that there's all this information there that is not utilised for the benefit of the person who's borrowing.
All right. John Bird, thank you very much. They're in the Houses
Thank
of
you very
Parliament
much.
for us. Now, are you suffering from Brexit fatigue? Worse still, is it sending you slightly round the bend? This week, the columnist Matthew Parris admitted just that. Writing in The Spectator, he confessed that this Brexit thing is driving me slightly mad. And I do mean that clinically, not as a rhetorical flourish. I really am becoming a Remainiac. He goes on to say this ridiculous Brexit thing is spoiling my summer, spoiling my life. And I can see it's doing the same for my adversaries on the Leave side too. Sounds like a midlife crisis. He concludes, I know I'm boring my readers. No, there's almost nothing left to be said. Know that the voice in my head, my mother's voice, telling me I just need a good night's sleep is right. But I'm not going to take a blind bit of notice of it. Joining us to discuss whether or not Brexit is making them mad is the Brexit-supporting Conservative MP Peter Bone and the Remain supporting columnist Yasmin Alabai-Brown. So, Yasmin, is it driving you round the bend?
I think, I honestly do think. I'm so pleased Matthew wrote this.
Because you would have done otherwise.
No, I am behaving, feeling kind of on the edge of madness, of mental illness with this.
What do you think? Do you feel the same as Yasmin?
No, Matthew's article in the Spectator is very good and I recommend it. And certainly I know who to ring up at 3:30 in the morning when I'm lying awake worrying about how we get out of because he's going to be awake worrying the other side. And I mean, everyone has on their phone a little app to say how many days and time is. With 322 days, 11 hours, 18 minutes and 10 seconds.
Is that your screensaver?
Yeah, so that isn't mad, is it?
Well, I'm beginning to wonder now. Yasmin, tell us a little bit more how this madness is manifesting itself for you in terms of Brexit.
I can't go anywhere anymore, including with distant relatives, and not have a fight. I was at a wedding party last week, a wonderful wedding party, and it isn't even left or right. And there were people from Momentum at this wedding party talking about why they were Brexiters. I had a big fight with them. And I had to go out and, like cigarette smokers, just get deep breath. And I thought, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's a wedding party.
Yes, what are you doing? You're ruining the wedding party, Yasmin.
I can't talk to relatives. I even had a fight with somebody on the bus. Normal citizens talking about why they wanted out because they didn't want foreigners here. I got up and had a fight. So I think I'm there with Matthew.
Right. Is it to do with this particular issue more than any other?
Yeah. Nothing's ever done this to me before.
Is there a reason that you appear, certainly outwardly, to be a little more calm because you've been campaigning for this for such a long time? Yasmin's come to it obviously relatively late because you didn't think it would ever become an issue and would ever happen, and it has.
Well, it's certainly right that it's not left and right, because when we were campaigning, we had communists on one side and ultra right on the other, and we were all working together. And it split my family. My youngest son is completely opposed to what I say, but I have been doing it for a long time. And I think the difference is we had the debate. It was a fantastic democratic experience, and the Leave side won, and people on the Remain side. They're not bad losers, but they've lost.
But that's
can't get over it.
It's to do with losing, isn't it, Yasmin?
Matthew's right that that Brexiters are actually, they won, but a lot of them are still furious. They're still furious. They won.
Yeah, and that is true, isn't it? You have won. You won that referendum. Your side were successful. And yet we have the sort of rhetoric and language from some Brexiteers that also might indicate that they are sort of going round the bend. I mean, betrayal, traitors in ermine, all of this sort of language. What does that say?
Traitors in ermine are nonsense. I mean, the House of Lords is doing what it should do, and we'll reverse those.
But in the context of what we're talking...
Well, I think what we could agree on, that we've got to stop banging on about it. We've just got to get it over and done with. The message that we can unite on to the Prime Minister is stop messing around, come out, get on with it, make the decision.
It's now, as I said, it's a kind of extraordinary internal disturbance, as Matthew Parris points out, a destabilised mental condition.
Right, so what's the cure, Yasmin?
I don't know, there must be already counsellors and therapists.
Sure there are.
Brexit counsellors.
Mental illness.
Right, I mean, how's the government doing with its healing process, bringing the two sides together, having listened to you two and Matthew Parris?
I have to say, in fairness to the government, they've managed to unite the Tory benches like they've never been united on Europe. Now, that's not to say we're completely united, but before we were genuinely sort of divided all over the place. Now, the vast majority, whether they were Leavers or Remainers, just want the government to get on and do this, get it passed and move on to the next stage of government. And that's quite remarkable. That is an achievement Theresa May, none of her predecessors managed to do.
Right, although if you talk to Anna Soubry or Nicky
No, you picked the one or two. I said there were one or two.
Or...
You're going to run out in a minute.
Right, well,
there's 350.
Struggling to think of any more. I think Peter has... I think an issue here is certainly that Peter has been campaigning on this for so long that he has already dealt with the sort of obsession, whereas a lot of Remain supporters who never really consider that the referendum would be lost are sort of having, a sort of post-traumatic stress issue where they're only now dealing with the obsession that they've only discovered after the vote.
You're absolutely right. This is like my divorce many, many years ago, because he had planned his exit and was going off with somebody.
This is like a counselling session.
And I was wounded, and I feel just as wounded now.
Well, maybe it's reopened those wounds. That's the problem. I mean, do you think Jim is implying that actually many Brexiteers were already mad when it came to
I think he was.
Maybe a little bit. Well, I think what's driving people mad is the same conversation over and over again. These conversations about the single market and customs union, it's boring, we're leaving. The exciting conversations, the exciting stuff is about what kind of country we build when we leave, what kind of infrastructure we put in place to take charge of these opportunities, what kind of immigration system we have. These are all the important conversations to be had.
And has that worked with ultra-Remainers, that conversation?
I can't even be there.
You can't even
be there.
go
there.
Oh, please, because this is going to be such a huge opportunity.
I mean by the mental block. All I want is for it not to happen.
Will it be easier when it has happened, when it's definitely happened?
I'll just cry. I cried when the marriage broke up for about 3 years. I cried.
All the exciting things you're talking about is what we should be talking about.
And we're planning for the future.
And we're still wallowing in
but
all the old arguments.
But you've just heard Yasmin say that that's going to make her probably cry in the way she did over divorce. Well, maybe not for 3 years. Well, I don't know. Or maybe for longer. I mean, you're sitting there in the knowledge that you've won and it's going to happen, and so it's easy for you to say.
Well, I get frustrated about banging on about the same old things. I want to move on and talk about an immigration system that is fair to the whole of the world, not just for, and all those sort of... They're the things we should be debating in Parliament. I'm not arguing on whether we're going to have a customs partnership or...
The problem is, as Matthew Parris said, the sensible ones, of which I'm one and he's one, can see you're taking us over the cliff. So we're both frightened and already grieving for what might have been had you not won. It's very complicated. So you being so calm is not helping my... Yeah, I'm grieving. I feel terrible.
Do you have some sympathy for Yasmin?
Come on.
I have sympathy for people who in that position because, and there are some, and I do think counselling would be a good idea. Maybe leaving the country would help as well.
Is that the new immigration policy?
I was going to say, so you're rid of Remain. Has this helped? Has this session helped, by the way?
The pressure up even more. It's the, the calm male voice telling me,
I've got some good news. I've got some good news. I'm introducing a private members' bill which will make a bank holiday for you to relax on. It's going to be the 23rd of June every year, and it's going to be called Independence
Day.
You just revealed something quite important. You've told me I can leave the country. This is at the heart of my anxiety, that actually a lot of Brexit was about the other and not wanting to accept the other. I'm not leaving. You should think about what you said.
No, the whole...
Is that what you meant?
No, of course not. The whole thing about the immigration policy, and the one thing that really annoys me, is we discriminate against people from India and Pakistan who should be allowed to compete to come here, if you like, that's the word, or the right word, on the same basis of everyone. And that we should be... And that's supported by left and right. That's the things we should be debating, not arguing about things that were already decided in the referendum.
Right, well, I don't know who's...
It's not over.
I really don't want you to leave.
It's not over. What, you're going to fight? You're going to keep fighting because you think it won't happen?
And then we'll probably end up in an asylum, or they don't even exist anymore. But maybe I will have to go somewhere where there is an asylum. I don't know.
Well, on that basis, on that happy, optimistic note, I am going to ask you both to leave, but just for studio at this stage. Thank you both for coming in. This morning, MPs have been debating a cross-party campaign for parents who have lost a child to be given 2 weeks bereavement leave. Currently, grieving parents have no automatic right to time off, although employers are expected to grant reasonable leave in emergencies. The MP Will Quince, whose son was stillborn full-term in October 2014, has been campaigning on this issue.
I never came into politics thinking that I would be a campaigner on baby loss and rights for bereaved parents, and it was tragic circumstances that brought me to this position. My wife and I lost our son, who was stillborn full-term in October 2014. I got 2 weeks off work and my wife had her full maternity. And it is really important you have that time to come to terms with what's just happened, the enormity of losing a child. On entering Parliament, I assumed that everyone would be covered under some legislation, but actually after anyone that loses a child older than 6 months isn't covered by any legislation at all. Since I spoke up about this and put forward a parental bereavement leave bill, I've been surprised and in some cases shocked by the number of people that have come forward and said actually how their employer didn't act with compassion and kindness and acted with complete insensitivity to what had just happened. There have been too many cases where people have had to take unpaid leave or take holiday, or even worse, people have just been forced back into work because they've been put under so much pressure. I think it's important to say most employers are brilliant and they do act with that compassion and kindness, but we need this legislation and this enshrinement in law of that right to take time off that is paid at the equivalent of statutory maternity or paternity pay. And that's really because there are some employers that just don't do the right thing. Every bereaved parent wants to know that their child's life, however short, had an impact, made a difference. And I don't doubt that my son's life, very, very short indeed, is going to make a difference by helping those tens of thousands of bereaved parents every year when we get this legislation onto the statute book.
And that was the MP, Will Quince, talking very movingly about the loss of his son and his attempts to introduce paid parental bereavement leave, which has been debated in Parliament today and has the support of both government and opposition. Not an easy subject for anyone to discuss, particularly in a place like the Commons Chamber, but important to do so. Now, just to prove that the House of Commons is a place where everything's just a warning, there are some flashing images. And we're joined now by Chris West. I'm speechless. He's literally written the book on Eurovision, and by Nikki French. She was the British entry in 2000 with Don't Play That Song Again. And she knows all about the politics of the contest as well as the singing. I suppose firstly I should just say, what do you think of the Israeli entry, what you've seen so far?
It's quite fun. I quite enjoy it.
Nikki?
You love it.
I'm the complete opposite. It's not my cup of tea at all.
What is it you don't like about it, Nikki?
Well, certainly from Tuesday night, I don't think there were many notes in tune. It's gone that side of ridiculous that is just too ridiculous for me.
All right, well, let's bring it back to how political the contest is, because it is political, isn't it?
Very political. It always has been, and it still is.
Really? It always has been?
Oh, yes. It was all part of... It was founded in 1956, and it was all part of the great movement at that time to bring European nations together so that we didn't have another war.
Right. And do you think it's been successful in bringing nations together?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, if you look at the Eurovision Hall, it's full of people from every nation in Europe waving their flags, and they all get on. So this is nationalism done in a nice way.
Is that how you see it? I mean, you were there.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Oh, I say many times in interviews, Eurovision does more for international politics and international relations than any politician could do. It's great when you're there. Everybody's very supportive of everybody else. It's competitive, don't get me wrong, but it's a friendly competitiveness.
Right, but were you victim at all to what people see as the sort of voting bloc syndrome?
Slightly, and also we were slap bang in the middle of the British beef crisis at the time, so we were not popular.
I see. And how did that sort of manifest itself then?
Into the worst UK placing at the time, actually, 16th
sorry.
place.
I don't mean to intrude
okay.
on
There were other extenuating circumstances, because they just introduced the televoting,
yes.
And they also...
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was a dreadful performance.
Never say that.
What about then being, you know, we're slap bang in the middle of the Brexit negotiations? How's that going to impact?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. We've got a nice song this year. I don't think it's winning material, but it's a good song. And if we come mid-table, then I think it shows that actually people aren't that fussed in Europe. If we don't get any votes from the televotes, then that isn't very good news for brand UK in Europe, I don't think. Just to explain, the voting is in half. Half comes from juries of music industry professionals, half comes from people like us picking up our phones or whatever and voting all around Europe. And the way in which our performance in Eurovision will be seen as a judgment on Britain in Europe, brand UK, will be the public vote.
Right, well, let's. I think we can show you a little bit of the British entry as we're talking for this year, since you mentioned it. I mean, is there any chance of an English-speaking bloc voting in favour of our entry?
Well, there's a little one. We've got Australia in it, and Malta very often give us votes.
That fabulously European country of Australia.
Yeah, no, exactly. I know, exactly. There's a long story to that, which you probably don't want to hear.
Well, no, I don't think we've got time for it. It must be a long story. What do you think of the entry?
Oh, I love it. I mean, I love Suri and I love the song. But Michael Fabricant's comment, I did my research last night and I worked out of the 43 countries that entered this year, 17 of them are non-EU. 7 of them have gone through to the final, 3 of which are big hot favourites. So it would be a very, very different contest without those non-EU ones, including Australia.
So, because it's not going to happen when we leave the EU, we're still going to be in Eurovision.
Of course.
Absolutely, definitely.
Of course. It's the European Broadcasting Union, not Europe. And geographically, we'll still be in Europe.
Right, are you going to be watching?
Absolutely,
yes.
I think it's the pinnacle of European culture. It's what when the Renaissance began in Florence in the 14th century, this is what it was all building up to.
Are you going to have a party?
Well, lots of Australians will be watching and waking up at like 2 a.m. to tune in. There's a huge following. It's great.
Thank you to both of you. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
Now, while we've been on air, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has been giving a speech in Glasgow. He's calling for Navy shipbuilding contracts to stay in the UK, and he attacked the government's decision to award the latest contract for 3 new ships for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary to overseas companies.
Today, we are calling on the government to guarantee that these 3 new ships for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary will be built in domestic shipyards. Building these ships in Britain would benefit those working in and supporting our world-class shipbuilding industry. Over 6,500 workers could be employed through this contract, 1,800 of them in shipyards. Decisive public intervention in support of this vital industry would protect it from anti-competitive practices by overseas firms and other states.
Jeremy Corbyn speaking a little earlier about shipbuilding. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you to my guests, you two for being guests of the day. But before we go, we're going to leave you with this protest song that was written during the Falklands War. It's called Shipbuilding, and it's performed here by Robert Wyatt. We wonder if the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn,